Hello, this video serves as an introduction to self and perception. This chapter of our textbook is very, very important for us to begin to understand interpersonal communication. One of the most important concepts to learning about interpersonal communication and how we communicate interpersonally is the concept of self. And the concept of self is going to be made up of three different types of selves. And so this becomes one of those very I always feel like Dr. Phil when I'm talking about this particular chapter, even though I don't really like Dr. Phil all that much. But I want you to start thinking about this. How well do you know yourself? Okay, the better that we know ourselves, the more articulate we can be when we are communicating with other people. So, if we start off with self-concept, which is going to be the first type of self that we need to think about, self-concept is going to be the very kind of stable view that we have of ourselves, the way that you see yourself, your identity. If I asked you who you are, what kinds of words would you use to describe who you are? So for example, I might say that I am a brother and a son. I might talk about being a teacher. I might talk about being religious or not. Okay, all of these kinds of things make up my self-concept. They are fairly stable over time. So if I wouldn't say that I'm feeling happy today, that wouldn't be part of my self-concept. However, I might say, in general, I am a happy person. That would be that would be an indicator of self-concept. So the way that we see ourselves is generally made up in four different sorts of ways. There are others' images of us. Okay, how do others view me? Okay, it's made up of my comparison of myself with others. How do I rank in terms of people my age or my peers or my friends? And we might do this in terms of, am I as successful, less successful, or more successful than most of my friends? Do I make the same, do I make an adequate amount of money or not enough money? Some of us value other types of milestones when it comes to self-concept. So perhaps we might talk about, am I married? Do I have children? Do I own my own home? Do I get to travel? That's going and that varies varies from people to people, right? I am not married. I do not have children. I'm 39 years old, and for some people, that might be damaging to my self-concept and my self-esteem. To me, it is not, right? I am exactly where I want to be. I kind of slip from comparison to others into self-evaluation, right? So again, if we go back to the whole, being married, having kids, that sort of thing, how do I feel about that? As I said, I'm perfectly okay with that. I'm exactly where I want to be, and so that becomes a kind of a type of self-evaluation. And then we also might look at cultural teachings, right? And again, with cultural teachings, we can talk about citizenship, patriotism, religion, all of those kinds of things. Fit into cultural teachings. So again, remember, self-concept is very, very stable throughout our lives. These are the core parts of our identity, the things that determine who we are. The second self that I want to talk about has to do with self-awareness. And self-awareness simply is your knowledge about yourself. How well do you know yourself? Okay, how forthcoming are you with information to your intimate others, to close friends, to acquaintances? We all know people who overshare, right? It's like, I don't know you very well. Why are you telling me this? We know yet there's other people, and I have a tendency to do this with my own family, right? As I have a tendency to not overshare with my family. I'm far more likely to overshare with strangers for some reason. Okay, but understanding who we are and our knowledge of ourselves becomes super important in terms of understanding how we communicate with other people. right? In your textbook, you can look at the Johari window in this section. This gives a way for you to start to kind of take stock in terms of how forthcoming you are with information, and it talks about how much information about you is known to everyone, how much information is known to other people but not to you. So maybe you're a jerk and you don't realize that you're a jerk. Maybe you're an oversharer and you don't realize that you're an oversharer. There's also how many secrets do you keep, so how much do you keep hidden. Okay, all of those things build up or build into your sense of self-awareness. Okay, and being self-aware is important. Okay, and we all know people who are very self-aware and others who are not very self-aware. The next type of self that I want to talk about, and the last type of self that I want to talk about, is self-esteem. Self-esteem is the value you place on yourself. Okay, and so what happens with self-esteem is sometimes, we have really high self-esteem and sometimes we have really low self-esteem. Research shows that there's really no correlation between high self-esteem and low self-esteem in terms of how effective of a communicator you are. We do need to think about, improving our self-esteem. Many of us, might have higher self-esteem in different areas than others. And so we always kind of need to work on, saying, yes, I'm good at this. Yes, I can do this, that kind of thing. I've run through these different kinds of selves pretty quickly, so do make sure that you look over them on your own. One of the last things I want to talk about today has to do with perception and interpersonal communication. When we're talking about perception, we're simply talking about paying attention and trying to understand the things that are going on around our environment. So whether you're shaking somebody's hand and it's sweaty, if you're talking to somebody and they seem really nervous, maybe you're smelling somebody's perfume, all right? That's all kinds of perception. Perhaps an easier way to think about perception is that when you're driving down the road, okay, and you can be driving down Locust Street here in Davenport, and you see traffic, you see the car in front of you. The car in front of you may have a bumper sticker on their car. You have the radio on. There's billboards, there's street signs, there's traffic lights. How do we determine what to pay attention to? Okay, how we determine what to pay attention to is a perception process. We do the same thing in interpersonal relationships. And so we talk about this in terms of the stages of interpersonal perception. Okay? The first stage becomes stimulation. Stimulation is when you become aware via your senses. So you hear music, you receive a text message, you taste candy. Okay? Now, we talk about selective attention and selective exposure in this stage. So what some things we pay particular attention to. So if I am at a cocktail party or something, I might select to pay attention to people who are talking about politics that are relatively similar to my own. Right? That becomes a very kind of selective exposure. Okay, many of us do that when we're watching the news. You like Fox News because you like that type of news. You like CNN because you like that type of news, right? Etc. Also, if we're dealing with there's going to be things that are going to get our attention quicker. So on one hand, I may have a box of lollipops, suckers, right, candy, and on the other side, I might have a box of dynamite. Okay, I'm probably going to selectively attend to the dynamite because I see that as far more important, right? Is danger rather than just the simple pleasure of having candy, right? And so we have selective attention. Stage 2 has to do with organization. This is how you organize what your senses have picked up, and we usually do this through rules, right? Some of them have to do with, well, what is closest to us, what things seem familiar to us, what things seem really, really different to us. When we are in an uncomfortable situation or somebody behaves in a way that we are unsure of, this definitely causes some chaos within ourselves, and we have to figure out how to attend to that. There's lots of different ways. We could take really kind of simple scientific way. I could give you a list of numbers, and if I group them up in terms of 3 numbers, 2 numbers, and then 4 numbers, many people would say, oh, that's a social security number. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a social security number. I have just grouped the numbers together in that way, right? Sometimes we automatically fill in gaps because we're doing things or we're hearing things that we've heard many, many times. And so we kind of stop paying attention and just kind of fill in the end because we assume we know what's coming. That becomes another way of kind of engaging in the organizational process. Stage 3 has to do with interpretation and evaluation. These two things are put together because they happen together. We can't separate them out. We can try not to evaluate. We can try to say that we don't evaluate, but we always are evaluating. So this interpretation and evaluation is going to be based on your own filters. You determine meaning and evaluate what you have sensed. Again, what's important to you? For some people, happiness is important. For others, money and physical material things become far more important. And so that's going to influence your interpretation and your evaluation. In interpretation and evaluation, we oftentimes talk about racism and stereotyping, ethnocentrism, all of those kind of things happen within this stage. Stage 4 is going to be memory. This is your interpretations and evaluations are going to be placed into memory, and then we recall them at a later time. And a lot of times this memory is then brought back up into the stage 2 and stage 3. Finally, stage 5 has to do with recall. As you go through this process in the future, you may access what you remember, you reconstruct items in ways that are meaningful to you. Sometimes recalls can have inaccuracies. They can include stereotypes, inconsistencies, and contradictions. So all of those things happen in recall. There's 2 things that are left in this chapter that I want to make sure that you take time to look at on your own. The first has to do with impression formation. And in the impression formation section, there's several different theories. I want you to pay special attention to 3. The first is the self-fulfilling prophecy. The second is the primacy-recency effects. And then the third has to do with the attribution of control. So I want you to make sure that you spend a few extra minutes looking those over and making sure that you understand how they impact the perception process. Finally, at the end of the chapter, the book is going to give you some goals and strategies for improving your impression management. We can always be better at this, okay? In terms of what we pay attention to, okay? So I wish you luck, and I will talk to you next week.